All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Victoria Caña, and I'm going to be your keynote speaker today. And I'm going to be talking about my path to a career in games. So, how I turned my love of gaming into a full-time career. So, a little bit about me. Right now, I'm a lead producer at a company called Riot Games. And Riot Games is a game studio. We're known for making things like League of Legends, Valorant, Teamfight Tactics, and Wild Rift. Has anybody heard of any of these games? If you could raise your hand. Okay, I wasn't sure. I don't know. And some people typically ask, hey, as a producer, what do you do? And it's very difficult to describe what I do, but essentially what I do is I lead a team of really talented folks. They're multidisciplinary. They do everything from engineering to game design to art to UX to make awesome games that we want players to enjoy. Before that, I used to work at Wizards of the Coast as a producer and also as a product strategist. So has anybody heard of Dungeons and Dragons or Magic the Gathering? Can you raise your hand? Okay, see some hands. And then on the side, I also co-founded and I'm also a game designer at a boutique publishing company called Caña Games that I started with my husband and also with my sister. And then, yes, you can see on the side over here, so I'm 27 years old right now, and I made it on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list for games last year. These are a couple of the different games that I've worked on. I've worked on Magic, Dungeons and Dragons. I worked on Riot's digital card game called Legends of Runeterra. And I also self-published my own board game called Gladius. And I also published a party game with my husband called Hot Takes. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how did I even get into the games industry in the first place? And I wanted to start at the very beginning. So I was born not too far from here, actually. I was born in Pomona, California. And at the bottom of the screen, you can see those are my parents, Mylene and Mauro. And they were immigrants from the Philippines. And I would get babysat a lot at this house. This was in Panorama City up in the valley. And while I was there, my babysitter had this nephew who didn't have any siblings. So he would always get me and my sister, Valerie, to play a bunch of different games with him and do a bunch of different activities. So some of the different things that we did were pull roly-polies out of the ground and race them. We learned how to pick oranges out of a tree with a really long stick. We played GameCube games like Super Smash Bros. And Mario Party. And we also played a lot of different board games. We learned how to play games with cards like Speed. I learned to play Mancala. I learned how to play Monopoly. And it was really at this time when I was in elementary school that my love of gaming really solidified. Here are some of the other games that I really enjoyed playing. Why are you guys laughing? Like, what made you laugh?
Maple Story.
Maple Story. Yeah. These are some of the games that I really enjoyed playing. Over there, if you're not sure what this is my first mobile game on my mom's Nokia. And it was a game called Snake. It was all pixel. And whenever my mom would do errands and I was bored out of my mind, I'd be like, Mom, can I borrow your phone? Can I play Snake? And you could just like move a little snake around and it could eat food and get longer and longer. I also had a Tamagotchi pet. I think those people still play those right now. And you basically raise a pet and it just demands food and wants attention, and then it poops a lot. And I also played some educational games. Like on the bottom right, you can see I played this game called Diploma Dogs. It was about teaching dogs different facts and helping them graduate from college. And I also played a board game called Sorry because my sister really liked playing it because she was really competitive. So my whole life, I always loved playing games. I was always a lifelong player of games. But I never really thought, oh, wait, can that be a job? Could I pursue this as something that I do every single day? Until I was in college. So when I was in college, I chose a major that was sort of vague and flexible. My major was media, culture, and communication, and I went to New York University. And part of why I chose that major was because I did not know what I was going to do with my life. When I was in high school, I went through a bunch of different potential career paths. I thought I'd be a park ranger. I thought I'd be a librarian. I thought I'd be a hotel manager. And it just so happened that when I was applying to college, I thought, oh, okay, I'm really good at communications. Social media is popular. Old people don't know what it is, so they keep wanting me to help them with social media, because that was around the time that Twitter started and also Instagram. And so I thought, yeah, I'll study communications. And while I was in college, I actually started dating my husband, Alex. He's also in the audience. He's over there. Alex, hope you're not embarrassed. And he went to another school in Philadelphia called Drexel, and he was about 2 hours away. And one of the things that we had to figure out when we were together was, okay, well, what should we do together? Like, what do we even have in common? And one of the things that we had in common was that we both really liked playing games. We mostly played video games, but we wanted something that we could do together in person and have fun together with. And so we started really getting into lots of different board games, like the 2-player version of Catan called Rivals of Catan. We played a game called Seven Wonders Duel. We played Magic the Gathering, lots of different types of games. And while we were together, I also started looking for more different types of events that we could do together. And one of those events was the Tribeca Games Festival. And at that particular year that we decided to go was the year that Riot Games, the company that made League of Legends, was doing a big talk, an all-day talk about how they made League of Legends. So they brought everybody from the game designers to the sound designers to the marketers to talk all about their game success and how they made it. And it was at this conference that we spoke to one of the panelists. His name was Stone Labrandy, and Stone was a game designer at Riot, and he was also a professor of game design at Carnegie Mellon University. And we went up to him and we said, hey, Stone, like, we never really considered a career in games. My parents, like I mentioned, they were immigrants, and whenever I would talk to my family, they would always say, hey, why don't you just be a doctor? Or why don't you be a lawyer? Or, you know, things that are normal, that we know about. And the thing that Stone told us was if we wanted to get into game development, the very first step would be to try making our own game. And it didn't have to be anything fancy. We didn't need to grab lots of different people. We didn't need to know how to do that much stuff. All we really needed were papers that we had around our house. You could grab some markers, be scrappy with it, and just try making some rules and try making a game. That's all you really need to do to be a game developer. And we were like, what? That's it? That's so easy. We can do that. We have paper at our house. And so we did exactly that. We tried making all sorts of games. We tried making a game called Saviors of Japan, which was a cooperative deck building game where you try to save a fantasy version of Japan from a bunch of monsters attacking you. We made a game called Legions of Rome, which was a game about moving around different armies throughout Rome to try to gain the most political influence. And you can see in this picture over here, that's me and Alex and some of our friends just like using them as play testers because we needed them to figure out if these games were any good. And our games, you know, there was a wide variety in terms of the level of funness. Some of them were mediocre. Some of them were kind of awful. But there was one game that really stood out as a prototype that seemed like it had hope. And that game was called Gladius. Gladius is a game that we created, and it's about playing as a spectator where you bet on and rig the gladiatorial games. And when we play tested this with our various friends, the thing that caught our attention was that at the end of the game, they didn't frown, they didn't stay silent. They said, can we play again? And we were like, what? You want to play again? And we didn't have to force you? So that's how we knew that we were onto something good here. So we thought, why don't we try pursuing publishing this game in earnest? We may not be legit game designers, like we are literally college students, but everybody has to start somewhere, right? So I Googled on the internet, like, hey, how do you make a game? How do you make a product? And so we started out by filling out something like this. This is basically a product vision and strategy sheet where we wanted to answer questions about, hey, what's our vision for this game? If we're making this game, what do we want it to be about? Other questions we asked ourselves were, who's the audience for this game? If we're making this game, when we envision who the players are, who are they? What are their needs? And we also asked questions like, what were our business goals? My business goal was to avoid financial ruin and ideally make a profit. I'm like, if we can make a profit off of this, that's awesome. But if we can break even, like, I'm also cool with that. The next thing that we did is we did market research. And market research is just like a fancy business term where you do research on other competitors in the market. So we looked at lots of other different betting games, like Camel Up and Spartacus, Council of Verona, because we wanted to learn about what types of games they were. Were they successful? Were there things about them where there were problems that we could potentially fix with our own betting game? We also took a look at other successfully funded Kickstarters by new game designers like us. And the reason that we did that was because we knew we were coming in. We knew that we weren't credible. It's not like we could publish a game and people would know who we were. So we wanted to see, hey, has anybody like us done this before? Were there any people who were nobodies and they just loved making games and they tried to self-publish it on their own? And so we were able to find a few different games like Fantastic Factories, Someone Has Died, and Fire in the Library, where they were made by completely brand new game designers, and they were able to raise thousands of dollars on crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter so they could successfully make their game. The next thing that we did was figure out, hey, we're making a game, right? That means we need art. So all I did was I looked on Twitter. I'm like, who's an artist? How do I find one? Hashtag this, hashtag that. Like, how do I find somebody who's good and affordable? And I found somebody. Their name was Cheryl Young, and they were mostly an artist for Minecraft mods. So all of their art was kind of blocky like this. But Cheryl was a recent college grad like us and was also affordable. So we reached out to them and said, hey, Cheryl, like, this is our idea for a game. Do you think that you could come up with an art style that would fit this game? And so we hired Cheryl to make a couple of different sketches for us of gladiators. And Cheryl sent us these. And we thought, okay, I think we've got something here. Let's hire Cheryl. We worked with Cheryl to develop an art style for Gladius. So even though our game is about Rome, and Rome, when you see it in media, it typically has a painterly, very serious art style, lots of dudes stabbing each other. We didn't want that vibe for our game. We wanted a different version of Rome that captured more of the spirit of the diversity of Rome. And we wanted it to be more lighthearted and fantastical. So we worked with Cheryl to make an art style that represented the tone that we wanted to have in the game. And it was very difficult because neither Alex nor I were really good at art, so we had to try very hard to figure out how to do this. The next thing is we built a pricing model and financial projections. And I know a lot of people don't like talking about math necessarily or talking about money, but this part is actually very important when it comes to making your own game, like if you're going to self-publish it. So I worked with my friend, her name was Natalie, and she was an econ major at NYU while I was a student, and so we worked together to build a pricing model. The purpose of the pricing model was to figure out, hey, if we want to make our own board game, how much is it going to cost to manufacture this? And then on top of that, if this is the cost to manufacture this and get it to our customers, how much should we charge for this game so that way we can ideally make a profit if we sell a certain amount? Then we moved on to the marketing part of the process, where we play tested and promoted Gladius at over 35 different gaming conventions to all sorts of players. And while we were there, we always got lots of different feedback on our game so we could figure out how to make it better. So we collected all of that data, we iterated on Gladius, and we continued to play test it until Gladius started becoming a pretty good game. We started getting awards, different accolades, we started getting media coverage, and by then we knew, all right, it's time. it's time for us to make a Kickstarter page. And Kickstarter, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's basically a crowdfunding platform where pretty much any person can go on there, make a website, and you can ask people to pledge to back your project so that way you can make it and bring it to life. In the end, when we launched Gladius in February of 2020, which was a few years ago, we were able to raise $100,000 thanks to the help of 3,500 backers. So we were super excited that we went from being basically nobodies who didn't know how to make a game to somebodies who kind of knew some things about how to make a game that was good enough to raise $100,000. How did I actually use these experiences to land a full-time job in games? So the idea that I had from the start was that getting into games, I wasn't exactly sure how to land a job. But I figured, hey, if I can prove that I can make my own board game, if I teach myself the skills like project management, game design, art direction, and I can show that I can do this all by myself, maybe that would be enough to prove to a company that they could hire me. And so I applied to a job at Wizards of the Coast for a job I wasn't qualified for. It was something super high level. It was like manager of game design for the R&D department. And I think I was 22 years old or something. I'd only been out of school for a few years, and I was working a different job at a company called Deloitte. And I wrote this very passionate cover letter and sent it on LinkedIn to the executive producer of Magic the Gathering and also to the head of recruiting at Wizards of the Coast. And the very next week, they immediately emailed me and wanted to interview me. And they told me, hey, Victoria, you seem really great. We wish you had more years of experience, but let's talk. I didn't get the job that I wasn't qualified for, but I did end up getting a job as a producer. And so I got to be a producer where I worked on Magic the Gathering products. So I worked on Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. I worked on the Lord of the Rings set. I worked on Magic's Secret Lairs. I made some fun little mini games that appear in Magic. And I spent a good 2 years at Wizards of the Coast, and I truly had the best time. It was so fun. And I started thinking about, hey, what's next in my career? I think I've accomplished a lot here at Wizards of the Coast. I'm a really ambitious person. One day I want to be an executive or something. I want to climb to the top because I know that there aren't a lot of women or people of color in games, and the best way to make change is by getting to the top. And so I thought, maybe I should go to the company that inspired it all, Riot Games. There was a game producer role that had opened up for their tabletop division. And I thought, when I read the job description, I can do this. I have every skill that they have listed out here. I'm going to apply, and I think I'm going to get it. So I applied, I interviewed, I passed through every single interview, and I made it to the final on-site where they have you do 4 hours of interviews. And I was feeling really good about it. And then the recruiter emailed me to let me know that I didn't get it. So this was pretty sad. This was in the middle of the pandemic when I couldn't go outside. So I laid on the floor of my house and I cried to myself. I was so sad. I was like, this is the end of the world. I can't get a job at Riot. I'm worthless. But then I had a revelation, which was, what if I approached applying to game dev jobs the way that I approached making a game? Just because this was a failure, just because I got rejected now, does that mean that I would really get rejected every single time? And so I applied the framework that you typically use when developing a game, and I modified it slightly in order to apply for a job, where instead of playtesting a game, I would apply and interview for jobs, I'd collect data and feedback, and then based off of the feedback that I got, I would iterate on my performance to see if it would get better. One of the things that I had to do in order to get better at this was I had to collect feedback on me, which was very hard. Very hard to be like, hey, recruiter, can you tell me why you didn't want me for this job? Can you tell me what my shortcomings were, please? It was very hard to do. But I believed that if I did this, and I believed that if I didn't do this, I wouldn't be able to figure out how I could get better. So I asked them, and the recruiter happily told me that they thought I was a very strong candidate for that particular role, but the challenges that they had were that I seemed more like a facilitator than a leader. They wanted somebody who had more product management skills. They knew that I hadn't shipped a video game yet, and they knew that I lacked experience in different video game methodologies like Agile, working with engineers, working in Unity, working in tools like Jira. So I said, all right, this is the list. You know, it's a lot, that's a lot, but this isn't something that I can't overcome. So I figured out how to address every single one of these points. I got 2 different certifications to be a Scrum Master and a Scrum Product Owner. These are basically 2 certifications that are typically important in the video game industry. I read a whole textbook about Agile game development for video games. I took a class from a company called Code Coven. They teach courses on how to make games for people of marginalized genders. So I learned how to program and design my own games in Unity. And then I entered a game jam on the internet with some of my friends and random people around the world. And I made a little video game called Hazel the Plant Witch, where you play as a witch that talks to plants with this device. And it was a narrative puzzle game that ended up winning first place. And so after all of this, I reapplied, and I ended up getting a total of 4 different job offers, including one at Riot Games for Legends of Runeterra. So I was super excited because the plan worked. I found out what all of my shortcomings were, and I found a plan to figure out how to address them, and it yielded results. So now I want to leave you guys with what advice I would give to aspiring game developers based off of all of the learnings that I've had throughout the course of the years that I've worked in games. The very first one is to play a lot of games. And I know this one seems like a no-brainer, right? But when I studied creative writing in college, one of the things that they always told me was, if you want to be a writer, the most important thing that you can do is to read a lot of books. It's the same for when you want to be a game developer. If you want to make a game, you should play a lot of games. So that way you can figure out, what types of games do you like? What do you like about them? What do you not like about them? What do you think that the game designers were trying to do with their particular designs? The next thing that you can do is you can try making your own game. I know that sometimes making your own game seems like something that could be very daunting. But like I mentioned earlier, all you really need is you. And maybe you can even grab a friend. And all you have to do is try grabbing materials around your house and coming up with rules and having people play it. And even if that is a little bit intimidating, another step that you can take is trying to modify an existing game. It's kind of like fanfic, but for games. So if there's like a game that you really like Monopoly or Settlers of Catan or Ticket to Ride, why don't you just take that game and try making some house rules? Or why don't you try taking that game and adding some additional rules to it and trying to mix it up into your own different version of the game? And there's a lot that you can learn from just doing that. And then maybe at some point, you'll be ready where you think that you can make your very own game. And on this slide, you can see this is an example of some different tools that you can use to make games at your house. So up at the top, these are some random pieces from, what game is this, Alex? Like HeroScape. These are some random HeroScape pieces that Alex and I had laying around the house, and some random cubes we used to prototype our game. And then up here on the right, you can see the same version of that game, but in a tool called Tabletop Simulator, which is a physics simulator, where you could just put like blocks and different pieces, and it's the same game, but just online, so we could play with different people around the world. And at the bottom, you can see this is when we actually turned it into a video game, because we had a team of people that we met online, and we ended up making a game called Castle of Glass. The other piece of advice I would give is to conduct research on what types of jobs there are in the games industry. So if you're hoping to have a job, you should figure out what the jobs are and if any of them interest you. There are all sorts of jobs in the games industry. You could be things like a game designer. You could be an artist. You could be a content creator or a streamer. There are all sorts of different things that you could do in the games industry. The list will probably surprise you. And on top of that, the list is growing because games are actually one of the biggest forms of media in the world. I think the last time I checked, it's second to television, maybe. You could also try just publishing your own game. And on the screen here, you can see on the left, this is Catherine Stipple. So she was a college student, and she had an uncle who was blind. So she decided to try making her own board game called Nyctophobia, so that way she could have a game that her uncle could play with her. And then on the right, you can see this is a kid. His name's Alex Butler, and he designed his own game called Taco versus Burrito, which is now like a best-selling game that he designed and published with the help of his parents. And the last piece of advice that I have for you is just because you don't know how to do something doesn't mean you can't figure out how. At the very beginning of my games industry journey, there were a lot of haters. There were a lot of doubters. They were like, you want to make a game? What do you know about making a game? Have you ever done this before? And I said, no, but I bet I can learn how. To be honest, yeah, there was a lot of doubt. People thought, well, you're young, you're naive. Like, can you really do this? Do you really have what it takes? And I'm a little bit spite-driven. I'm a little bit like, oh, you think I can't do it? Let me prove you wrong. So I took that energy, and I really believe that everybody starts somewhere. All of these successful game designers, all of these successful game developers, they weren't just born out of the womb and they knew everything. Somebody had to teach them, and they had to learn how to do all of this. And if they could do that, there was absolutely no reason that I couldn't do this. And with that, thanks everybody. I hope that you took away something from this, and I'm really excited to see the games that you come up with over the next couple of days. I appreciate it, and if you want to follow me on Twitter, this is my Twitter account, and I also have a little link tree to a bunch of different links. Thanks.